Hi, class. So as you saw from my email, we're not going to be meeting in person today because the power is out. So we'll do a video lecture. It's my intention just to go rather quickly through some of the main points that I want you to make sure you understand. That way you can pass the test and the exam, the exam for the unit and the final exam. So as we walk through this, I just want to show you some cool things I think that are helpful to understanding the story of Moses and the Exodus. And then this will set us up for our conversation next week on Tuesday. So here we have the slides here. Here we have our slides. So we'll go ahead and we'll walk through some of these. So just in way of keeping track of where we are, God's description of the world, very beginning, Genesis 1 and 2, is that it is good. And that he describes man as very good. And we understand this to be perfect. God made the world the way that he intended, the way that he wanted it to be. And, well, we ruined it. And we ruined it here in our story, we understand, through the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. As we recall from our conversation, that is not a superpower. It's not that you receive the knowledge of good and evil. It's instead that you are deciding for yourself what is good and evil. And all of us, every single one of us are sinners, and so every single one of us fall into the same trap even today. Now, God chooses to fix this problem in the world by making a covenant with one family. That family is the family of Abraham. So as you recall from our conversation, a covenant requires blood. In Hebrew, the word for to make a covenant isn't really make, it's rather cut. It's because you would cut animals in half, you would put them on either side of a path, and then you'd walk between those animals. And so this is how a covenant is ratified. And the promise that he makes to Abraham, remember, we're focused on those four things. A great name, which has lots of descendants. His descendants would become a great nation. That all the nations of the world would be blessed through them. And that the land of Israel would be given to his descendants. And so this is the covenant that God makes with Abraham. And we followed through the story of the patriarchs, through the story of Joseph, as Joseph is betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, but then God elevates him to a position of authority within Egypt and saves the family of Abraham from famine and drought. And that's where we left off. That was our last story. Now, what's interesting is they stay there in Egypt for a long, long time. They're there for about 400 years. And so as they stay in the land of Egypt, they settle in, they multiply, they grow very large. And we're going to look now at Exodus chapter 1. So Exodus chapter 1, I've highlighted a few key things that I want to talk about as we go through here. So as you have this open, if you have your own Bible in front of you, you can go ahead and take notes or whatnot. So these are the names of the sons of Israel who went to Egypt with Jacob, each with his family: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. The descendants of Jacob numbered 70 in all. Joseph was already in Egypt. Now, Joseph and all his brothers and the generations died. But the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly, increasing in number, and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. So notice here, first of all, that they multiply, they become very numerous in the land, which can be a very great asset or a great threat, and the next king seems to see it as a threat. So verse 8, then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies and fight against us, and then leave the country. So it's important that we understand in our story here that the next king, dynasties shift and change within Egyptian history, and 400 years is a long time. So we likely have a new dynasty of kings who are not familiar with Joseph and the help that he brought to the people of Egypt. And so we see this king takes them and enslaves them. Verse 11. So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. I wanted to pause right here because a lot of times one of the things that we tend to think is, the people of Israel, they were building the pyramids. These great, big, huge, massive stone tombs for the kings. That's not what's going on. These pyramids were already present in the time of, oh, where's my map? Oh, here it is. They were already present in the time of Joseph, and then also here in the time of Moses. So the pyramids are down here, and this right here at the base of the delta. Now Pithom and Ramses, they're up here in the delta, and so these cities are store cities. They're not building the pyramids. Just to put that idea aside. Now, the more that they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread, so the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labor and brick and mortar and all kinds of work in the fields. In all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. Okay? So they are oppressing the people of Israel. This is Pharaoh becomes the chief villain of the story up until this point. That here we have these people chosen by God, that God had selected out of all the nations of the earth. And Pharaoh is being quite mean. And so this is going to be a reality that the people of Israel are going to continue to look back at for the rest of their history. So then he attempts to get the Hebrew midwives to kill the baby boys. They lie to him and tell him that they're not gonna that they can't, because they give birth before the midwives arrive, which always makes me laugh, because if you give birth before the midwife arrives, what do you need the midwife for? But they became even more numerous, and the midwives had their own families, and so then Pharaoh finally just gives the order to his people: every Hebrew boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. So his intention is to destroy or to thin out the race of the Hebrew people by killing them. So that sets up our story. This is where we are from the time of Joseph. Joseph, a great service to the kingdom of Egypt, and now we have this terrible oppression to God's people in Egypt. Now, in the midst of this, we have the birth of a particular character, a particular person, Moses. And as we read through the rest of Scripture, Moses is going to become a very important name. He actually becomes a symbol for what's called the Law of Moses when we're reading the New Testament. So when they're talking about Moses in the New Testament, they're not always talking about the person, but they are talking about the Law of Moses, which we will talk about next time in class. So this particular person is important because he is born during this purge of the Hebrew boys. Now a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She saw that he was a fine child. She hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. And she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds in the banks of the Nile. His sister stood at a different distance to see what would happen. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. And she saw the basket among the reeds and sent for her female slave to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This is one of the Hebrew babies," she said. Notice here, she knows who Moses is. It's no secret, right? Mom has hidden the baby as long as she could. Now she's got to do something, so she puts the baby in a basket and floats it down the river. And Pharaoh's daughter finds the baby and takes pity on it and chooses to save the baby. So there's never any question in the mind of Pharaoh's daughter, or even in Moses, who he was growing up. He knew he was a Hebrew. Okay, so then the sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes, go," she answered. So the girl went and got the baby's mother. Notice here that the nursemaid for the baby turns out to be the baby's own mother, and so then she still gets to have a hand in raising her son. Now, Moses is an Egyptian name. It means to be born. Here it says, "I drew him out of the water." He's born out of the water. You might have Ramses. Some people think Ramses is the pharaoh at this time. Ramses, it means Ra is born. The Egyptians like to mash words together like that. So here we have Moses. Moses is born. He is put into a position of power just by being in Pharaoh's household. Okay. Now, Moses had grown up, and he went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. Okay, remember, they're still slaves. They're still oppressed. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Looking this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out and saw 2 Hebrews fighting. Asa, the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you judge and ruler over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." When Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. So Moses runs far, far away. He leaves the land of Egypt, which he's known. He goes way over here, down into the land of Midian. It's far away from his current location. Now, it's important that we understand. That Moses knew he was a Hebrew, and that he runs away, and it is while he is in Midian that he's going to encounter something truly tremendous. So let's go to here, chapter 3. Now Moses was tending the flocks of his father-in-law Jethro. He marries a woman in the land that he visits, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. We're also going to understand this to be Mount Sinai, as it is later referred to. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. It's important that we recall every time we see fire that we should first ask ourselves, is God present here? God is often present in the form of fire. And that is absolutely what's going on here. Now Moses saw though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called out to him from within the bush, "Moses, Moses." And Moses said, "Here I am." "Do not come any closer," God said. "Take off your sandals, for the place you are standing is holy ground." This is important. We're going to see this theme continued throughout the rest of Scripture as well. God's presence is holy. And where he is, things are holy. Things that are unholy, like us and our sin, these things are destroyed in the presence of God. And so we're going to see, especially next time, there are rules that God sets up to encourage his people to present themselves to him in a right and holy way. Then the Lord said, "I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." Now, important thing to pay attention to here. He promises to take them to the land. Okay, that's what he's promising right here. And as you recall, this is the promise he makes to Abraham with those 4 things, that covenant he makes. One of those is the land. Okay, and so we see here he's saying, "I'm going to take my people out of Egypt. I'm going to take them into the land into the land that I promised them." Okay. Now Moses says to God, verse 11, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" And God said, "I will be with you, and I will, and this will be a sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain." Okay, Mount Sinai. Moses said to God, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you.' And they ask, 'What is his name?' Then what shall I tell them?" Okay, so he identifies himself up here, God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, God, the God of your fathers, right? That if we've read the Genesis account, we know the story. This is the covenant God makes with his people. But we also need to pay attention to, okay, that was 400 years ago. So what is your name? I'm going to go and tell these people, what is your name? This is what God says to Moses. He says, "I am who I am." This is what you're to say to the Israelites. "I am has sent me to you." So this is the divine name of God. In the Scripture, whenever you see the word Lord right here, see Lord, this is the divine name of God. I will talk about why they do that in a second, but it's pronounced Yahweh. That is how you say God's name, Yahweh. Now, that means I am who I am. Now, when you read it, it kind of feels a little bit flippant. Like God said to his people, who sent you? What do you want my name? Or I am who I am, right? Like a kind of a flippant response. You know, like if you go and you're a child and you ask your mother, "Hey, Can I have a cookie? No. Why not? Because. That's kind of how it feels until we look at what I am is. I am is a to be verb. So in Hamlet's in Shakespeare's Hamlet, he says, to be or not to be, that is the question. He's contemplating suicide. He's thinking, should I exist or should I not? To be or not to be. In fact, most languages have a to be verb, which means I am. And it's asking, and it is stating this one thing: I exist. If you just say I am, all you're saying is I exist. There was a philosopher named Rene Descartes in the Enlightenment era, and one of the things that he liked to do is think about things like, do I even exist? And his conclusion was this: I think, therefore I am. That's what he said. I think, therefore I am. He's saying that he exists, and he knows he exists because he can think. And so here what we have is God's response to Moses isn't quite as flippant as, well, because I said so. His response is really a claim. It's a statement of who he is. So his name is Yahweh. His name means I am who I am. He's saying I exist. You want to know which God sent you? The God who exists sent you. That's who sent you. And this is very, very important because when we see what he is going to do to the Egyptians, we need to understand this idea. So we're going to skip ahead to chapter 12. We'll go back in a minute to earlier, but I want you to see this right here. This is the 10th plague. On the same night I will pass through Egypt, and I will strike down every firstborn of both people and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. So what we're going to understand is that this whole Exodus story is really ultimately about God's identity. So back to chapter 3. Who sent me? Who is sending me? I am who I am. I am the God who exists. Okay. Now, in the ancient world, whenever you would have a battle, it wasn't just a battle between the men on the field, right? The guys with the swords and the shields, and they're bashing each other and they're killing each other. The arrows are flying, the spears are stabbing, etc., etc. It's not just between the men. In the ancient world, they believed that gods were at war too. So if you had a powerful god, you would win battles against your enemy. And so here it's very important to understand that this contest isn't just about Moses and Pharaoh. It's not a contest just between those two guys. It's a contest between the gods of the Hebrews and the gods of the Egyptians. And the gods of the Hebrews is one. The one guy, Yahweh, I am who I am. Okay? Now, whenever you see the word Lord in Scripture, it is acceptable to replace that word with Yahweh. Now, the reason it appears in your Old Testament Bibles, L-O-R-D, in all capitalizations, is because the Jews have a tradition that whenever they would write the name of God, they would write Adonai instead. And they would write that to remind them that this was the name of the Lord, the name Yahweh, but they were not to use the name's Lord in vain. The second commandment, which we'll talk about next time. And so in order to make sure they never, ever, ever use the name of the Lord in vain, they just instead intended to never use the name of the Lord. And so they would just say Lord. And our English translations have kept that even today. So let's go ahead and continue. Now we see here his promise here is, I have promised to bring you up out of your misery in Egypt into the land of Canaan. And he's promising them that he is going to deliver them from the suffering in Egypt. Okay. Now this is incredibly important, and I want to jump ahead here to these slides. Notice here that God has made a covenant with Abraham, and as he's made a covenant with Abraham, he's given him a covenant. This covenant has to do with children. Okay, so the people of Israel, the descendants of Abraham, should view themselves as children of Abraham. They should view themselves as people who are different. They have a different identity. And the story of Abraham is to say, okay, you're circumcised, This is a reminder of this covenant. Your identities now as followers of Yahweh. And this is going to become very important to the people here in Egypt because they need to know who they are. And so God's declaration, I am who I am, is a statement of his identity. And as he goes against the gods of Egypt, we're going to see that he creates their identity too. Their identity for the rest of the Old Testament, and even up until today, is simply this. We are the people that God brought out of slavery in Egypt. That is their identity. And therefore, the Exodus becomes the theological heart and center of the Old Testament. We like Genesis a lot of times and spend a lot of time reading it because there's lots of great stories there. But the heart and soul of the theology of the Old Testament is the Exodus, that God redeems his people from slavery in Egypt. And that's really important that we understand that as we look through this story. Okay, now, we talked about the God, that God is who he is, right? That he is a God who exists. Most cultures worship other gods. And in particular, we have, in Egypt, we have a lot of religious cults surrounding the pantheon of Egypt. Ra, Horus, Hecht, Osiris, Anubis, Apis, Happy. There's lots of gods, and we're going to look at some pictures of them here in a second. Now, what I want to do before we look at those is I want to look at this quote from Martin Luther. Anything on which your heart relies and depends, I say that is really your God. You and I today, we don't necessarily look at gods and say, oh, this God is, this statue is my God. We don't look and say, oh, you know what? I believe in Horus. That's my God. There are some people who still do, but by and large in the West, we don't. We might have, let's see if I can get it off my shelf here. I have this little rock here. This is a jade stone. And I keep this because I think it's the only idol that I actually own. But a student gave it to me one time because it is one of those healing rocks. And so there's a whole write-up of it right here. This rock is supposed to help me with benefit lungs and adrenal glands and nervous system. This is an idol. Okay, there's a whole religious cult surrounding the worship of. Well, it's not really worship of, but it's a trust in these stones to help benefit you. That is an example of a god, something you trust more than God. Anything your heart relies and depends, I say that truly is your God. Now, in our culture, we like to trust in things that are not Yahweh God. We like to trust in things like medicine. If you're sick, you go and you take medicine, or you go and visit a doctor, and you trust that to make you better. Or money. All your problems can be solved with money. You find out as soon as you have money, that's not true. You still have problems. We might trust your parents. Up until you left home and came to college, your parents were the ones who looked after you and cared for you. Maybe in some ways they still do. We might trust our politicians, right? They're the ones who are supposed to have all the answers to all of our problems. What is it that you trust? It's not that these things are necessarily bad. It's not that a rock is bad. Okay, the idea is that if you put trust in it over God, you've made that thing into an idol. And in ancient Egypt, the people of Egypt had placed their trust in these man-made idols: Ra, Horus, Hecht, Osiris, Anubis, Apis, Happy. And so what I want to do now is I want you to, we're going to walk through the different gods, and we're going to see how each plague is an attack against one of the gods. Now, where did I put it? Here it is. This is the assignment. I want you to fill this out. There are 10 plagues on here. As we go through the slides, I'll show you the different gods. I want you to go ahead and fill this out and identify who the god is, and what the plague is, who the god is, and the significance of that plague. So we'll walk through that here now. Okay, we'll start by reading Exodus chapter 7 first, just so we can start with a very visual plague. Then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is unyielding. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he goes to the river. Confront him on the banks of the Nile, and take in your hand the staff that it was changed into a snake. Then say to him, The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to say to you, Let my people go, so that they may worship me in the wilderness. But until now you have not listened. This is what the Lord says. By this you will know that I am the Lord. With the staff that is in my hand, I will strike the water of the Nile, and it will be changed to blood. The fish in the Nile will die, and the river will stink, and the Egyptians will not be able to drink its water. Okay, so it's important that we understand. You can even write this on this version right here. The plague has turned the Nile into blood, and we're going to understand this God to be happy, H-A-P-I. I'll show you in a minute. Now, the significance of this plague is this, that God has, here's a picture of happy, that God has slain the Egyptian god Happy. Now, in the ancient world, the Nile River is very, very important. Egypt is right in the middle of the Sahara Desert. Without the Nile River, there is no Egypt. You cannot live in northern Africa without the Nile River. So the Nile River not only brings water, but it also brings rich silt and sediment from the Ethiopian mountains as it flows down into the Sahara Desert, and every year this Nile River would flood and take that sediment and would spread it out over several miles around the river, offering some very rich farmland. It makes this Nile River really allows for Egypt to become a very powerful nation, because now you can have so much food that you have people who don't have to be farmers. You have people who can be priests and kings and administrators and warriors. And so here we have Happy, the god of the Nile, this blue one right here. And Happy, as the god of the Nile, all of a sudden all the Nile River is turned to blood. What it looks like to the Egyptians is that Yahweh just killed their god. Now remember, Yahweh's point is, I am who I am, I'm the God who exists, and he is going to demonstrate his power and authority over all the gods of Egypt, as he says in Exodus 12, verse 12. So here we have, he destroys Happy, he destroys the Nile, this bounty of the Nile, and the people of Egypt are now having to look and say, oh, wait a minute, this God may actually have power. Now, there are 10 plagues, which means the first one apparently doesn't take root in Pharaoh's heart and mind. And he hardens his heart and refuses to let them go. So as you flip through, if you want to have your Bibles open and look through Exodus chapter 7 through 12, you're going to see the 10 plagues. And they're conveniently with subheadings that tell you, hey, this is what the plague is. So let's go to, I'm going to give you the first three here. Or first four, I should say. So first one is water turned to blood. The next one is frogs. Frogs are everywhere, bouncing all around. Hecht, this is the frog god. You can see here with her frog head. A lot of the Egyptian gods have animal heads, which is really bizarre. But I think it's kind of cool because it tells you, well, this is what this god is the god of. It's pretty obvious. You don't have to think real hard. This is the god of frogs. And as the god of frogs, she is also the god of fertility. And so here, we got frogs bouncing all over the place. She has no control over the frogs. If she was truly the goddess of frogs, she could control them and keep them out of the Egyptians' daily lives. Okay. Our next two are connected, gnats and flies. These are both connected to the god Beelzebub. Beelzebub is the god of the flies, lord of the flies. And what he would do is he would have these little flies and use them as messengers. And so, the phrase, I like to be a fly on the wall. Well, in Egyptian religion, the fly on the wall worked for Beelzebub, and he went back and told Beelzebub everything that happened in the room. And so here we've got gnats and then flies that are everywhere. They cannot be controlled. And so here's a picture of him, and we have him accepting a child sacrifice. So that's also very common and horrible. But that was who he was, the god of the flies. So Yahweh has started the first four plagues, or targeting three different Egyptian gods to destroy them and to prove to the Egyptians that he is Yahweh, he is the God who exists. Okay, the next 5 plagues here, we've got death of the livestock. There is in Egypt a belief in a god that is called the Apis bull. They had an actual living cow living in a temple, and it was called the Apis bull. It was a god that they worshipped, and when it died, they mummified it. And we actually found countless mummies of this bull, as they have generation after generation of this animal has continued to be used for worship. Okay, Livestock dies. God is more powerful than Apis, the bull, and all of his animals. The next three aren't gods per se. Boils, hail, and locusts. These again are the Sesper-Ankh, as we talked about last time, those priests, those magicians. These are all things that the Sesper-Ankh were supposed to be able to handle. They were supposed to be able to deal with. If you were sick, like you had boils or some other illness, you would go to the Sesper-Ankh and they would offer to you some kind of medical remedy. And so these magicians, they actually became very learned, very powerful within their society because they're essentially scholars and priests at the same time. So boils, hail, locusts, these three things are against the gods, or the priests of the gods. And then lastly is darkness. And Ra is the god of the sun. In his golden chariot, or golden boat, he goes over the world. And as he goes over the world, he lights the day, and he prepares for battle at night. And he battles the chaos serpent, Apophis, at night. And he does battle with this serpent and keeps chaos at bay. If his sun suddenly goes dark, it's very easy to see as an Egyptian, okay, we're on plague 9 right now. We have been dealing with all these problems. All our gods are losing these battles with this Yahweh God, and now Ra is gone. Ra is gone, which means that chaos will soon reign and destroy us all. Okay, so these are the plagues. They are important because they deal specifically with gods or priests of Egypt as they are making idols and worshiping things other than Yahweh God. God is proving who he is, that he is the one true God. He is the God that exists. Here are some pictures. I put the priests from the Prince of Egypt movie, which you haven't seen. Is great fun. They have a star-studded cast in that movie as well. And I think it's Steve Martin and Martin Shorter are these two guys who play them. So here are our priests, our Sesper-Ankh. Here is an image of the Apis bull. And then here's an image of Ra. Notice again, here we have an animal, right? The Apis bull is actually a cow. But then here we have Ra with this falcon head and this golden disc above his head. This is Ra, and he's on his boat, and he is the god of the sun. So the sun is also pictured here as well. So just keep that in mind as you're looking at these different gods. The Egyptian gods have weird animal heads. Makes them really cool, I think, to look at. But they also are, it's very obvious, this is who they're the god of. He's the god of the sun. Okay. Now, Passover is the most important holiday in the whole of the Jewish festival. And what we need to do is we need to look at, we'll go back to Exodus 12 here. I want you to see this festival, and it's very detailed, and we're going to see that more next time, especially in your reading for this week, because we're going to be dealing with some of these detailed rituals and this kind of thing. What I want to do is I want to look at what God commands his people to do, why he commands them to do it, and what this institutes. So the Lord said to Moses and to Aaron in Egypt, "This month is to be you, the first month of your year. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. If any household is too small for a whole lamb, they must share one with their nearest neighbor, having taken into account the number of people there are. You are to determine the amount of lamb needed in accordance with what each person will eat. The animals you choose must be year-old males without defect, and you must take them from the sheep or the goats. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all the members of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. Then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the doorframes of the houses where they will eat their lambs. That same night they are to eat meat roasted over the fire, along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. Do not eat the meat raw or boiled in water, but roast it over the fire, with the head and legs and internal organs. Do not leave any of it till morning. It is, if some is left till morning, you must burn it. This is how you are to eat it, with your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. On that same night, I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of people and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. Okay, this is very important. So first of all, God is telling his people, this is how you're going to survive this plague. This plague is going to be against Pharaoh and against Osiris. So Osiris was considered the king of Egypt until his brother Set murdered him, cut him into pieces, and spread him all over the ancient world. Osiris's wife/sister, Isis, goes and finds the pieces, puts them back together, and he then becomes king of the dead. So here we have death. Osiris is supposed to be able to handle that. He was also at one point the king of Egypt. His son Horus now is closely associated with Pharaoh, and Pharaoh is also considered divine. So here we have the situation where this plague against the firstborn is against Osiris, it's against Horus, it's against Pharaoh. This whole thing, these are the gods that are being targeted here. Now, he said this is what Yahweh God says. He says, you're going to go ahead and you're going to take an animal, you're going to take a lamb, and you're going to smear its blood on the doorposts. Okay, which is super gross, I think. Maybe you do too. But you're going to smear the blood on the doorposts, and this is very important because what it's going to do is it's going to teach the people of Israel about what this cost. We're going to see in our reading for this next week over and over again God using his talking about how we come to approach him. So if you remember all the way back in chapter 3, he says, take off your sandals, for where you are standing is holy ground. This is what God is commanding his people to do because how we approach him matters. In this case, blood is being used to atone for the person in the house. We're going to call this substitutionary atonement. Okay, substitutionary atonement. Now, what that means is one thing dies so that another might live. Now, in the case of Passover, the thing that dies is the lamb. The lamb is sacrificed. Its blood is put on the outside of the doorpost. In ancient Israelite theology, blood is understood to be the life of the animal. We understand that from a biological perspective very easily. Blood is what takes in nutrients from what you breathe in or what you eat to the rest of your body, and it takes out the things that are bad. And that is where the waste that's exhaled or expelled in other means. And so we have this idea that blood is very important to our life. So much so that in Israel, they understood blood to be the life, that without the blood, that the creature dies. And so they take the blood in this instance and they smear it on the doorposts to prove to say this is our house. In our house we have smeared this blood. The life of the lamb is given, and God is saying if that ritual is done, then the person in the house will live. Substitutionary atonement. The lamb dies so the person lives. Now they're going to eat the lamb. They're going to eat a whole rest of the meal. They're going to eat unleavened bread. Bread is baked without yeast in this case. Most often, bread with yeast tastes better, but it takes longer. You have to let it rise. You have to knead it multiple times. They're going to eat the lamb roasted whole. They're not going to take the time to butcher it and cut it into strips or to steaks or lamb chops or whatever. They're just going to roast it whole. They're going to eat it. And then it talks about how you're supposed to dress. You're supposed to dress with your staff in your hand, your sandals on your feet, and then your cloak tucked into your belt. This is what they're talking about. In the ancient world, men wore tunics. Now, if you've ever worn a tunic, or if you're a woman and have worn a dress, you can understand very easily a floor-length piece of cloth wrapping around your legs makes work difficult or fighting. And so you could gird up your loins, and this is a picture graphic of how to do that. You take it, you grab the cloth up, you swing it back behind, you tie it around yourself. You could also just tuck it into your belt, as the text says. But then this frees up your legs, basically makes a pair of shorts out of it, or I guess it would be a romper, whatever it is. You would be able to free up your legs, so you'd be able to walk around more easily, to do battle or to do hard labor. So notice here the call is for them to eat with that, dressed that way. The reason is because following this plague, they will be leaving Egypt, and God wants his people to be ready to roll. He wants them all ready to go. It'd be like today if God had said, all right, we're gonna leave. I want your suitcase packed. You're going to microwave some burritos. You're going to eat it standing up with your shoes on, and we're going to go. And that's essentially what's going on here. Now, this is important theologically because it is with this plague that God demonstrates his power and demonstrates his authority over Pharaoh, over the gods of Egypt. And he demonstrates that he is Yahweh God, that he is the one who is actually an existing God. All these other gods of Egypt, they do not exist. And so these 10 plagues help demonstrate that reality. Now, this is a major theme within Christianity. It's a major theme within Scripture, which is why it's a major theme within Christianity, to understand who our God is. And as Luther pointed out, we still have gods today. So what I want you to do is, after you have finished filling out this document, I want you to go ahead and draw on the back in an Egyptian style, okay? In Egyptian style, what the God of Concordia University Ann Arbor is. And you can't pick Jesus, because that would be obvious. It's a Christian university, so of course we hold that we worship Jesus. But I want you to think through, what is it that the students or the staff or your faculty, your teachers, whoever it might be, what is it that this university, the people in this university, worship instead of Yahweh God? And draw it in like an Egyptian style with like a weird head or something like that. But I'd like to see that drawn on the back of your Yahweh Wins document. And this is going to be your quiz grade for this lesson. So it's my hope that this was quick. I know we had the out of power situation, but that's your assignment for today. Fill out this document based on what we talked about. Draw the God of Concordia Ann Arbor, and underneath that God write what the God's name is and why that is the God of Concordia Ann Arbor. Give me like a paragraph description. That way I know, oh, this is what you're thinking. That makes sense. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Feel free to let me know, and I'd be happy to answer your questions. I look forward to seeing you guys next week as we talk about how God then takes this identity of his people and says, this is what it means to follow me. So, again, blessings on your day. Let me know if you have any questions.